Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to meet some seriously weird creatures from way back when? We're talking prehistoric, the real OG oddballs. You know, you're into this stuff, so we're going way past just what they look like.
Yeah, we want to know how all those crazy features actually worked, Like, did that weird frill help them survive or what?
Exactly. So first up, we got to talk about the Uinetherium, sometimes called the Death Beast. Come on. With a name like that, you know it's going to be good. Eocene epoch, right? After the dinos, but before, like, most mammals we know.
Right, think rhino-sized, but with count them, three pairs of bony knobs on its head.
Okay, wait, three? What were those even for?
Good question. Probably covered in skin, so not for fighting directly, maybe display, to attract mates or, tell each other apart in a crowded forest. But here's a kicker. Huge body. Teeny brain, surprisingly small.
So all brawn, no brains.
Seems that way. Maybe back then smarts weren't as important as just being huge and strong. Plenty of food, maybe being that big, scared off most predators.
Makes sense. Different strategies for a different time. Okay, hold on. Speaking of weird head stuff, there's the Arsenoitherium. I've seen pictures. Those horns are insane. Like a rhino, but you said they're more related to elephants.
Yep. That's what we call convergent evolution. Totally different animals, but they end up with similar features because they live in similar ways or places, like sharks and dolphins. One's a fish, one's a mammal, but both streamlined for the ocean.
So those horns on the Arsenoitherium, not for ramming stuff.
Evidence says they were hollow, more for show, like attracting mates, or maybe even making sounds, amplifying them to talk across long distances.
Wow, like a prehistoric loudspeaker. That's wild. Okay, this next one is a total mystery. Only a skull, right? Andrewsarchus. What's the deal with that?
This one's a head-scratcher, literally. Early Eocene epoch. For a long time, everyone thought giant wolf-like predator, but that's based on just that huge skull and jawbone.
So how did they even guess what the rest of it was like?
It's like detective work. We look at relatives, other hoofed mammals, and fill in the blanks. Muscle attachments, teeth compared to other carnivores. The latest thinking is maybe not a hunter after all. Maybe more of a scavenger? Those jaws were for crushing bones, getting to the marrow.
Huh. Okay, so maybe not the terrifying hunter we thought, but still a weird one. Now, this one's definitely a predator, and a mouthful to say. Amphissian, a.k.a. the bear dog. What's the story there?
Imagine bear-sized wolf jaws, but agile like a big cat. North America, Eurasia, Miocene epoch, truly top predator material. The bear dog name fits perfectly. They weren't actually bears or dogs, but their own thing.
Convergent evolution again. But how they compete with other big predators for food?
So different predators often specialize, Different prey, different hunting styles, so they're not always going head-to-head. Lions after a zebra, then hyenas for the leftovers. Amphissian with that size and those jaws, probably taking down large prey, but also maybe scavenging, kind of like a prehistoric grizzly.
It's crazy how these creatures found their own niche, Okay, get ready. This one's like straight out of Dr. Seuss. Platypelodon, the shovel tusker. A shovel for a jaw. Seriously.
Seriously. Think elephant relative, but instead of those curved tusks, a long, flat, lower jaw, like a giant shovel. For ages, we thought they stooped up water plants, but now we're thinking more like stripping bark, cutting vegetation, maybe even digging for roots or to make wallowing holes to cool off.
So not just weird, but useful.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what other strange stuff we misinterpret. Speaking of, let's go to South America. The Therium, the South American surprise.
This one's amazing. They look so much like horses, long legs, single-toe hooves, lived late Miocene to Pleistocene, but not horses at all.
What? So they evolved to be like horses but weren't related. How does that even happen?
South America back then, open grasslands, kind of like where horses evolved in North America. So similar pressures, similar results, long legs for speed, hooves for running, teeth for grazing.
Wow. That's wild. Okay, brace yourself. This one's a doozy. Joseph manisi, a.k.a. the giant rodent, as in rodent the size of a bull. How is that even possible?
Pliocene to early Pleistocene, a true giant. And not just big, those incisors, the rodent teeth, huge and powerful, probably for defense, digging burrows, maybe even taking down small trees for food.
Okay, that's terrifying, but also kind of amazing. How does something that big even survive?
So South America back then was an island continent, pretty isolated. So the animals there evolved differently. No big predators like elsewhere. So this giant rodent had room to, get giant.
Like a whole different evolutionary path. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, last one for now, and it's a heavy hitter. Glyptodon, the walking tank. Seriously, that sounds like a sci-fi movie creature.
It's real, though. Basically a giant armadillo. Imagine, small car size, covered in bony plates, and a club tail for defense.
Talk about defense. What could even take that on?
Well, even with that armor, they were invincible. They lived with saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, serious predators. The shell helped, but younger ones, or if they were caught off guard, probably vulnerable.
Wow, the Pleistocene was intense. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already.
Just getting started, there's so much more to discover in the fossil record. Each one of these creatures, a whole story waiting to be told.
I can't wait to dive in deeper. Stay tuned for part 2. We've got even more amazing prehistoric creatures coming up.
Back again for more deep dive. Before the break, those amazing glyptodons, remember? Like walking tanks from the Pleistocene.
Yeah, crazy how they lasted millions of years with all that armor. It makes you think, what other wild adaptations helped prehistoric animals survive back then?
Speaking of, let's head to Australia. Ever heard of the Diprotodon?
Oh yeah, the giant of Australia. Wasn't that the biggest marsupial ever?
Exactly. Like, picture a wombat the size of a rhino roaming around during the Pleistocene. But get this, they were herbivores, just munching on leaves and grasses.
Wow, from tiny wombats to rhino-sized. What was the advantage of being so huge?
Good question. Could be a few things. Maybe, in a tough landscape, being big meant reaching food others couldn't. Plus, that size alone might have scared off some predators. But there's another idea. Thermoregulation.
For what?
Temperature control. Big animals, they lose heat slower in the cold, gain it slower in the heat. So in Australia, being huge might have helped them stay comfy, save energy.
Like built-in climate control. But even giants like that died out eventually. What happened?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's around the same time humans showed up in Australia.
So you're thinking humans had something to do with it.
It's a possibility. Humans hunt, they change the landscape. That could have impacted those big, slow herbivores. But climate change was happening too. Australia getting drier, tougher for big grazers. Probably a combo of things did them in.
Makes you think even the best adaptations can't always win against change, especially when something new, like us, shows up. Speaking of those ancient giants, the Untatherium, the one with the head knobs, I'm still stuck on those. Purely for show.
It's tempting to say that, but likely they were multi-purpose. We said display, maybe recognizing their own kind, but some think maybe temperature control too.
Wait, like radiators on their heads?
Exactly. Standing in the sun, those bony knobs covered in skin, maybe with blood vessels, would radiate heat away.
Like a prehistoric heat sink. Okay, back to convergent evolution for a sec. Arsinotherium, that elephant relative that looked kind of rhino-ish, those horns. Any other uses?
Actually, something maybe for feeding too, like pushing over trees, breaking branches for leaves, kind of like elephants use tusks to get at bark or roots.
Wow, some multi-tools. Nature really gets creative. All right, time for more mystery. Andrewsarchus. That giant skull, has anyone figured out more about it?
Remember we said, maybe not the killer we thought. New studies, comparing it to other skeletons, suggest more like a bone-crushing scavenger, kind of hyena style.
So, a big change from hunter to scavenger. What made them think that?
Well, the teeth, while huge, weren't good for slicing flesh, better for crushing and grinding. And the legs, from what we can tell, not built for chasing things down.
Makes you wonder what else we've gotten wrong about prehistoric life. Okay, but now for a predator that was definitely the real deal. Amphision, the bear dog. What made them so successful?
They were adaptable, not picky eaters or hunters, which meant they could live in lots of different places, North America, Eurasia, you name it. And with climates changing back then, that flexibility was key.
So, being a generalist paid off. Did that help them last so long?
Probably. They were around over 10 million years. That says something about their evolutionary strategy.
Adaptability is a superpower, it seems. All right, one more dose of weirdness. Platybilodon, that shovel-jawed elephant relative. Still blows my mind. How did they even use that thing?
It was a weird one for sure. Imagine, stripping bark, cutting branches like giant shears, maybe digging for roots, even shoveling mud or sand for wallowing.
Talk about multi-purpose. Makes you wonder, what other strange stuff we just don't understand yet?
Right. Evolution's full of surprises. The weirdest things often work the best.
So true. All right, let's head back to South America. Thotherium, remember? Horse-like, but not a horse. What does that teach us about evolution?
It shows how similar environments can shape totally different animals in similar ways. Open grasslands, both in South America and where horses evolved. Similar pressures, similar results. It's like evolution has a plan, you know?
Like a blueprint for success in certain places. Okay, one last giant for the road. Joseph the giant rodent. Rodent the size of a bull, how is that even a thing?
It's crazy, right? South America's isolation probably played a part. Different evolution, no huge predators like elsewhere. This giant rodent had space to, well, get giant.
A world ruled by rodents, that's a wild thought. What other weirdness is still out there waiting to be found? Okay, switching gears to defense now. Glyptodon, that walking tank with the shell. Why all that armor?
Well, think about it. Saber-toothed cats, dire wolves roaming around. That armor's a pretty good deterrent.
Not foolproof, but protection against attacks and that tail club. Not something you want to mess with.
Like a prehistoric knight. But even knights fall eventually. What happened to the glyptodons?
Probably a few things, like with a lot of those giant creatures that disappeared. Climate changing, humans showing up, hunting, changing the landscape. Tough for a big, slow herbivore to handle all that.
Another reminder, even the best defenses aren't always enough when the world changes. We've covered some serious ground today, from Australia to South America and back again.
It's just a taste of all the amazing prehistoric life out there. Each one of these creatures, a whole story waiting to be told.
I can't wait to hear more. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive. We'll wrap up this prehistoric safari and see what we can learn from these ancient giants. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite the journey through prehistory, haven't we? Meeting some truly bizarre creatures along the way. Yeah, it makes you realize how much life has changed over millions of years, and yet you can still see echoes of those ancient creatures in the animals around us today.
It's like peeking back in time.
Oh.
Okay, before we wrap up this prehistoric safari, let's take one last look at a few of these oddballs and see what we can learn from them. Like the Uintatherium, remember? Big herbivore, head full of bony knobs. We talked about display, maybe even temperature control, but was there a downside to all that headgear?
Well, think about it. Moving through a forest with those big knobs could have gotten snagged on stuff pretty easily. And to grow those things took a lot of energy resources that could have gone to something else.
It was a trade-off.
Yeah.
The benefits had to outweigh the costs. Makes you wonder if those costs eventually became too much, especially as things changed around them.
Okay.
How about the Arsinoitherium, that elephant relative with the rhino-like horns? We talked about display, maybe communication, but any other uses?
Some scientists think they might have been helpful for feeding too, like using those horns to knock over trees, break off branches to get at leaves. Kind of like elephants use their tusks.
Multi-purpose tools, I love it. Nature's so resourceful. All right, let's talk about Andrewsarchus, that mystery creature with just the skull. We talked about how it might have been a scavenger, not a hunter. What does that tell us about trying to figure out prehistoric life from just fossils?
It shows that our ideas can change as we find more evidence. For years, all we had was that skull, easy to picture a fearsome predator. But studying it more closely, comparing to other skeletons, gave us a new perspective. There's always more to learn.
Like a puzzle where we only have a few pieces. We have to use our imagination, but also be ready to change our minds when new pieces show up. Speaking of changing ideas, remember the Amphision, the bear dog? Super adaptable, lived all over. What's the lesson there?
I think it shows that sometimes being a generalist is the key to success. Not picky, able to make the most of different situations. In a world that's always changing, that adaptability can be a real advantage.
Makes sense. Being flexible opens up more doors. Okay, got to mention the Platybelodon one more time. That shovel jaw is just too weird. What does that tell us about how evolution works?
It shows how evolution can take something simple and modify it to fit a very specific need. It may look strange to us, but for the Platybelodon, it was perfect.
Nature is full of surprises.
Yeah.
Sometimes the weirdest stuff works the best. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into these amazing prehistoric creatures. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little more awe for the history of life on Earth.
Me too. And hopefully it inspires everyone to keep learning, keep exploring. There's so much more out there to discover.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep those imaginations running wild. And remember, the past is full of amazing stories just waiting to be uncovered.